Hello YouTube, it's Supernova, back with more X-Plane 11, and we are back in the King Air B200. We're going to be taking a flight today from Beziers in southern France, across the border into Spain and Girona. We're going to be going from a freeware airport to a payware airport, so there is a comparison to be viewed there. Of course, the first thing to do is to set up the aircraft. Which doesn't take a huge amount of time. There's a lot of detail if you're willing to or are interested in almost role-playing the startup. Obviously you don't need to set seatbelt signs or temperature. Would actually be interesting if you were graded for passenger satisfaction, if you had the temperature right, seatbelt signs when you should have them on. But of course that's not part of the simulation. Again, I'm doing things that maybe are not absolutely necessary, but I'm trying to stick to a somewhat realistic startup. And this is the first complete flight that I've done in the B200, which is surprising given the fact that I've had the aircraft for about a year. It's an aircraft that I like, but I would like it an awful lot more if it had more detail, if it felt closer to a study sim. Obviously the comparison would be with the the Beach Baron and the Reality expansion pack, because that does give the Baron quite a bit more detail. Carenado are not known for their study sims. They're known for aircraft that are very nice to look at and perform reasonably well, but not to the study sim level. The Baron would still be my favourite aircraft of all that I've seen so far in X-Plane, and that really is again because of the Reality expansion pack, which means that it performs much more like you'd expect it to. There aren't the significant gaps you sometimes see, for example, in the B200. I have noticed that when you turn the lights on the overhead, it seems to be a digital system. You press the master switch, as you'll see here, or you should see, and the lights come on maximum. You turn them off, all the knobs turn to their minimum positions, and it would be nice to have the ability to adjust the individual lights. It's not a huge thing, but it's something that is nice to have. Just noting the gauges on the instrument panel as the engines begin to start. Now we're starting in the early evening, so it's going to become increasingly dark as we fly. And we'll be going from, as I said before, Beziers across the border to Girona. It's comparable to the route from Toulouse to Barcelona, but this time we're a little bit further to the east, and it's a significantly shorter journey. I've tried a few times to do this flight without success. What has tended to happen is the aircraft would not fly the GPS. It would just not follow it. It would follow it a southern route. Even after checking, double checking, triple checking the settings, it would just You see there, I turned the lights on and all the lights turn on maximum. You can actually turn the individual knobs, but it just doesn't seem to have any effect. But I tried to do this flight a few times, but it would always fly south. And that only, in fact, starting this flight I wasn't sure whether it would actually work or not. I actually had to try a few different aircraft before it finally fixed itself.
Beziers via information Delta 1500 Zulu weather.
But at this point I'm not convinced that this flight is actually going to work.
10, rain. Sky conditions 1500 scattered.
Of course it does, but
broken. Temperature 9.
I'm not certain of that until we're in the air and actually following the GPS.
Arriving runway 27. Departing runway 27. Advise on initial contact. You have Delta.
Flight plan is quite simple. We're going to be following the Kelam 6 Whiskey SID, and the route will be Perpignan PPG, and the star will be Canig 1 Foxtrot, and the approach the ILS Zulu to runway 20, and we'll be flying at 8,000 feet. As this is my first flight, I do make one or two mistakes. Guess the first thing that I'll do is to clear the flight plan, checking that Beziers is actually listed first, because that has been a problem before. And entering Perpignan as a waypoint between the SID and the star. Of course, when going from Toulouse to Barcelona, we also used Perpignan. And destination Girona. Now, if you have any questions about setting up the G430, the G430 in the B200 is the exact same unit as is in the Cessna 172. So if you look at the flight planning tutorial for the 172, it is exactly the same procedure for the B200. Once you have the basics understood, it's a really simple system to use. I'm going to be using the Banal initial approach fix. We're just loading the approach, we're not actually activating it until approaching Banal. And we'll be descending to 4,500 feet at Banal. As you can see, the weather is not so good. We have quite a bit of rain, and you'll get to see the weather radar in action today. Using stock weather, still not using Xenviro because we're waiting for Xenviro to release 108. Now I've seen screenshots showing standing water at airports, which would actually would have looked really nice in this flight. I'm not sure if that's going to be released with 108. That depends on how far along they have with it, how reliable it is. The same with moving clouds. Xenviro are in a difficult position because Laminar are updating the sim itself, and as they do that, it inevitably breaks certain things, so they have to wait for laminar to at least come to a kind of a plateau in development, so that anything that they do with 108 is going to stick and not going to be broken the day after that release. But for now, using stock clouds, stock weather. Now I don't think that the X-Enviro weather will show up on weather radars, weather displays. Initially, I think developers are going to have to use an X-Enviro SDK for that. But we'll see how that goes, see what develops with that. Now as we're taking off from runway 27, we're going to turn right, and we'll have to go right to the end of the runway. I'm going to do an abbreviated sort of run up short of the runway, and that's just doing the basics of turning certain things on. I won't be doing a governor check. I don't even think it's possible to really do that in the B200 as it is. And at this point we have a long run to the end of runway 27, or the start, depending on how you want to look at it. So we're going to skip the long taxi, and we will get to we'll teleport to the end of the runway. And here we are, preparing to turn and get onto runway center line for takeoff. I've made one small but very significant mistake here, and I haven't set CDI source to GPS. I will realise that quite soon after takeoff. Also set elevator trim a little bit too high. We kind of rock it up on takeoff, so I'd have to use less elevator trim the next time. Autopilot is set up and ready. You see here I'm setting trim, and I just set too much trim. You'll notice that as I take off. Takeoff should be about 7 degrees, but it's significantly more than that. Making the final adjustments. You can see the heading bug is set to runway heading. And we are ready to go. Increasing power, release brakes. And rotate. See, the climb rate is way too high. Nose is pitched at way too much there, bringing it back down to a reasonable level. And at this point looking for 500 feet to engage autopilot, turning the yaw damper on. And we start climbing up towards those clouds. I wish that there was a better rain effect on the Carenado aircraft. You can see it, there is a kind of rain effect, but it's not really all that good. I know they developed a rain effect, and now they're holding off doing it again because maybe Laminar are going to do it. Hopefully Laminar will produce a really good and effective rain effect that can then be used by all developers. It does make sense for one company to do it, one central company to do it, rather than everyone having to reinvent the wheel every time that they want a rain effect, because it's going to be the same for all aircraft anyway. And it does make sense to have just the one rain effect rather than having a different rain effect for every aircraft, as long as it's done right by Laminar originally. So clearing 2,000 feet. And at this point everything is under control. You can see there I've realised that I didn't set the CDI source to GPS, and now thankfully GPS is working, although I was concerned that we were going to turn due south again, but thankfully it corrected itself and we are on the right heading. So now we are working through the first waypoints and heading ultimately down to Perpignan before turning on to Banal and heading towards Girona. So for now I will leave you to enjoy the flight, and I'll join you again when we are closing on Banal. And welcome back, and as you can see we are just below the clouds in a great amount of turbulence, ready to activate the approach, as we are now at Banal, down at 4,500 feet. You can just make out the airport. Unfortunately we're on autopilot, so the autopilot can keep us relatively straight and level. Relatively. Really pitching around a great deal. Switching to approach mode. Now this is when it starts getting a little bit crazy, because the autopilot switches from 195 to 43 degrees on the course, which completely messes up the autopilot. I will ultimately have to fly this by hand. I don't know why it did that, but previously I was practicing Nice approach, and that is a course of 43 degrees to runway 04. So for some reason it seems to have gotten confused between the two. As you can see, we're quite offset here. Airspeed is under control. On arrival you're looking at 150 to 175 knots. You can lower, or you can extend the approach flaps at a maximum of 195 knots, but you don't want to be doing that on arrival. You want to be considerably slower, especially as we're at 4,500 feet. We need quite a bit of time to get down to Girona. So you can see I'm fixing the course. So that causes a little bit of confusion, trying to work out exactly what's going on. See, I have to disengage autopilot and then get the aircraft on the correct course, because it isn't going to fly it by itself. It seems quite happy to be a little bit offset, so we should be. I don't think it's an actual offset approach, it's just messed up somehow. So I'm disengaging autopilot, getting it vaguely back on course. But when I come to re-engage autopilot, it tries to turn back right where it started. Of course, this would be much more difficult if clouds were down to minimums. Fortunately, we can actually see the runway. You can see the single runway that we're aiming for. We're about on course. As soon as I engage autopilot again, we roll to the right. So there's no alternative but to hand fly it, which of course is a little bit more time consuming and problematic than using the autopilot. Having to also maintain airspeed, so we're a little bit slow at the moment. Trying to maintain about 600 feet per minute descent. The aircraft is prepared for landing, gear down, full flaps. Just trying to keep it as straight as I can. Let me get it lined up. Of course, it's much easier when autopilot's doing it for you. And coming up for the, I think it's the third mistake of this flight. On landing, I just probably don't flare early enough or pull back hard enough on the stick, so we come down for a hard landing. It's rated a little bit. I love the traffic coming down the road there. It's rated as pretty terrible. I don't think it's absolutely as bad as the rating makes it out to be, but it's one thing practicing approaches, it's another thing doing it at the end of a long flight. Although this is not a particularly long flight, but when you have a lot to think about and when you've flown the approach by hand. But this is why we practice. So it's not going to be the best landing in the world again. But you only get one attempt at this. Just keeping it as straight as I can. Followed the glide slope quite well. And speed is about just where it needs to be. We've been looking at 95 knots for landing. That's probably about a better speed than 100, but it's quite marginal. That tree really comes out of nowhere. And then as you can see here, just starting to flare, but not quick enough, not hard enough on the pullback. And so we get kind of caught a little bit early. We just touch the ground just as we're flaring, just as we're bringing the nose up. No need to use reverse thrusters. Plenty of runway. I'm going to take the final exit on the left. As I said earlier, with Vex Enviro, we are going to get standing water, not on the runways I would expect, but the general area of the airport, which is going to be really interesting. If you've seen the screenshots, you'll know what I'm talking about. And coming up to the actual end of the runway, looking for the left turn. It's been a fairly short flight, an hour long in total. Exploring some new airports. As you can see here, we'll come up to the left turn. Need some practice, I think, to really master the taxi speeds and the power required. But that does come with practice, I'm sure. So now maybe you can get a comparison between the freeway airport at Beziers and the payware at Girona. It is a little larger airport, I think. I'm just starting the shutdown process here. Getting all the anti-ice stuff off. And taxi lights on. Taking out the elevator trim. Transponder to standby. Weather radar off. Really should have pushed the propeller controls full forward right after landing. And now we begin the fairly long trip down towards GA parking. Gives us an opportunity to look at the airport at night. It takes a lot of power to get the aircraft moving. Unfortunately, there aren't any AI aircraft here. I don't think the airport is set up for world traffic, unfortunately. At some point I'm going to have to find a tool that's reliable that will allow me to create ground routes and taxi routes and set airports up specifically for that. I know you can do that with the world editor, but that seems to cause more problems than it solves. I know the developers, they're working on a tool, I think, to create ground routes outside WED. Can't remember exactly what that's aimed at doing. There are tools available to do it, but I haven't found one that actually works yet. Or at least it works for me. It would be nice to get these airports working so that there is traffic. You'll sometimes see aircraft taking off and landing, but the ground traffic, the taxiing traffic isn't there quite often at airports because they're not set up for world traffic. Which is a shame, really, because it does add a lot to the atmosphere. Just slowly continuing down towards, well, we're looking for Tango 2. So we've exited on Echo 2 and heading towards Tango 2. I'm looking at the signs, trying to work out where we are. In fact, I think we might have missed Echo 3, which is the one that I was looking at. I thought we might have missed that turn off. and taking a later turn off, but we are looking for Tango 2. So now getting into the kind of a late evening. And we're going to take this turn off, which I think is the correct one. And find a convenient place to stop. Some pretty good detail. And at this point we'll start to actually shut the aircraft down. So the inverter off, avionics master off, auto feather off, and just gradually work through the checklist of turning the aircraft off and shutting it down. So it has been an interesting flight. Could have been a better landing, obviously. One or two little errors there, but not bad for a first complete flight in the aircraft. And off go the lights shortly. There you go, everything off. So as always, hope you enjoyed that flight. It was an interesting flight for me. Hope you enjoyed it too. And as always, feel free to like, comment and subscribe.